7th of October marks 1 year since Hamas launched a large-scale attack on Israel, killing over 1,000 people and kidnapping more than 200. Well, in response, Israel declared war on the group in Gaza, leading to a year of devastating conflict. Tens of thousands have died in Israeli strikes on Gaza, and recent weeks have seen over 1,000 casualties in Lebanon as Israel expands its attacks to Hezbollah. Many Israeli hostages from the initial attack remain in Gaza, while millions have been displaced, facing severe shortages of basic necessities. But let's now reflect on this day with DIRCO Director-General Zane Dangor. Zane, good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. I think it's hard to believe that it's been a year since that day that those images were beamed really across the world of Hamas militants as they launched their attack on Israel on the 7th of October. Perhaps allow us to be a fly on the wall on the discussions that then took place within the very walls of the Department of International Relations and Cooperation on that day and the days that followed.
Thanks, Melinda. I think on the day, of course, we were all shocked. It's not, as we said over the last 12 months, while we were not shocked that there was an attack. We were shocked at the intensity of it. Anytime civilians are killed, we have to call that out. While we may understand, for example, that people fighting colonialism and oppression have, under the Geneva Conventions, the right to use arms to defend themselves, but they cannot attack civilians under the Geneva Conventions, and that's why we referred the attack on the 7th of October to the International Criminal Court as well. Why we said it was not unexpected is that if one looks, when we visited the West Bank, we could not get into Gaza earlier in 2023, and we met with former Israeli diplomats and NGOs as well, and they predicted that the level of escalation and intensity from the current Israeli government on Palestinians, they did not rule out a mass attack at all. So while we cannot excuse the massacre and killings of civilians, it was not unexpected. Before October the 7th, if one just goes back for 20 or 30 years, there was about 15 massacres of Palestinians, and that excludes, for example, the attacks on Gaza in 2008, 2009, and also 2014. And since October 7th, of course, you've just mentioned the tens of thousands. It's about 45,000 people killed, and you spoke about the millions of people displaced. But you also had what was called the Flower Massacre, the Tent Massacre, the Hospital Massacre, the Refugee Camp Massacre. So what we have is, because of this occupation, you've got a series over the last 60 or 70 years of mass atrocities. And this is not going to end until we end the occupation. And I think this is the reality that we have to face. And so this is the kind of discussions we've been having before October the 7th, on October the 7th, and after October the 7th.
Yeah, well, one thing that can't be denied is just how outspoken government authorities really have been. I mean, DIRCO releasing a statement just on the 2nd of October, and I'm going to read from it. The government of South Africa is gravely concerned about the continuing escalation of military action by the State of Israel on the State of Palestine and the Lebanese Republic, as well as the subsequent response by the Islamic Republic of Iran on the 1st of October. But what you've also done is noted with dismay that United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres was declared a person non grata by the State of Israel. I mean, when we look at our position on how the international community is being looked at and certainly how it's responding to the rising tension in the Middle East, what is your sense about, the role that South Africa needs to play moving forward when the Secretary General of the United Nations is persona non grata in Israel?
What we need to do is defend the institutions of global governance. We need to defend the United Nations. We have challenges with the United Nations, as you may know. For example, we've been asking for the UN Security Council to be reformed. We've just seen with the war in Ukraine, Gaza, just how ineffective the Security Council has been. But it's the only institutions that we do have that will allow countries like South Africa and others to have access to justice. Without that, you'll only have the powerful players using force and other means to ensure that they can get their point across about how they want to shape the world. So we need to defend the UN, but we've also seen a series of attacks in the last couple of years by Israel on the institutions of the United Nations, whether it's the International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice. We've seen them attack the Secretary General, not just this time, but before. But, just calling the Secretary General and declaring him a persona non grata, I think that is a huge reflection on how they see the institutions of global governance and the fact that they don't see themselves as accountable as the rest of us feel that we should be to the rules and the norms of international law.
Yeah. A final thought before I let you go, Mr. Dangor. I mean, the steps that, if at all, can and will be taken by the South African government moving forward as the violence seems to expand in the Middle East. But I think another big question is, with the expansion of the violence, is this a concern that there may very well be a conflict that leads to what some are terming a third world war?
Look, the escalation in the Middle East is one that we've been warning about for a while. As we've said, the depopulation of Gaza wasn't just because of the attacks on October 7th. It was always a plan to depopulate Gaza and even elements of the West Bank. The attacks in Lebanon isn't because there was a provocation. It was also, from what we've seen, and also what we've seen, the statements about wanting more land from the Israelis is also a plan. This, we've been warning, could lead to a broader war in the Middle East. Whether this leads to a third world war, I don't think so. But what is of concern, though, is that you're dealing with powers in the Middle East with undeclared nuclear capabilities. And we cannot discount in an environment where, respect for the rules of the wars of law, we've seen the war crimes, that a weapon of mass destruction may not be deployed in the context of a broader conflagration in the region.
We're going to have to leave it then. We really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for speaking to us, Mr. Zane Dangor there of the Department of International Relations.